ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Motorcycle Vision. My name is Steve. It's a beautiful November day here in northern Jersey, so I took my bike out for a ride. And I thought I would talk to you today about the story of how I learned to ride a motorcycle. Now keep in mind, I haven't been riding all that long, but it is kind of an interesting story. So, it begins with my daughter, who said to me, "Hey Dad, let's buy a motorcycle. We can go riding together. We can have some fun. Like a daddy-daughter thing. We can go out together. We can have all kinds of fun." I didn't want to do it. I don't want to ride a motorcycle. It's not my thing to ride a motorcycle. She's like, "Come on, Dad. My friends do it. It's fun. Blah, 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 blah." All right, fine. But I don't know how to ride. So she goes to one of the places in the town where they actually do the certified riding things. And she goes, she takes the class, she passes the test. Like, "Dad, I took the class, I passed the test, let's go buy a motorcycle, you take the class, you pass it." All right, so fine. I go there, I sign up about 2 weeks after her, I take the class, I do not pass the test. So what happened to me was, the bike that they gave me was called a V-Star. It was a V-Star 250, and it had something wrong with its clutch. So, by something wrong with its clutch, now keep in mind, you're talking to a person who's never sat on a motorcycle before in his life. This clutch was wide open or shut. That's all you had. So like they talk about at the class, the friction zone. This stupid thing had no friction zone. The only thing this thing had on it was you're wide open or you're wide closed, and that's all there was. So, it took off like a bat out of hell. And I didn't know, that it's not supposed to be this way. How would I know? So I see all of the, oh boy, squirrels are just stupid. Anyway, so I see, ironic, a squirrel would run in front of me now while I tell you this story. I'll tell you why later. So ironically, everybody's taking their classes, everybody's taking the class, doing the turns, everything else. I can do it when it's in first gear. I figured out when I put it in second gear, it's a bit smoother and easier to control. But I'm struggling because the damn thing's always, just ready to take off. So by the end of the first class, I report it to the guy, and I try it, and he tries it out. And he's like, "I just don't have another bike to give you. Everybody's assigned to their bike with the number on it, and that's your bike for the rest of the class, and that's all there is." Fantastic. So I go to take it, and I think I put my foot down 3 times, and because you put your foot down 3 times, you lose. So it is what it is. So I got home. My daughter's making fun of me. "Ah, you can't pass it. A little girl can't pass it. Ah." Anyway, I call them up, and I'm like, "Listen, can I take the class one-on-one with a V-Star that doesn't have the sticky clutch?" And they're like, "Okay, you could do that. We can sign up some one-on-one time with you, and you could do it like that." And then I said, my daughter's really bugging me to buy her a bike in the meantime. And they said, "Well, you know what? It's actually a good idea. You took the class. You've learned the class. You've learned everything that we're going to teach you. So why don't you practice? Buy yourself the bike and practice." And I was thinking about it. I'm like, "Yeah, it's a good idea. Let's get on the bike and let's practice." So I go out and I find a Honda Rebel 250. It's the one that I still have in my garage. And I find this bike, and they bring it home for me, and that's all fine. Everything's great. And I start taking it around. And I took it around, I had a permit. I took it around the block, it's almost like doing the opposite of concentric circles. Then a little wider, a couple of more blocks, just kind of like getting used to it. So I'm okay. So there is a street in my town, and in a future video I'll point it out to you, but there's a street in my town. It is big and wide, and it is downhill. And it's got a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. You know, every town has their speed trap. That's ours. So I'm on that. And literally, I am going 25 miles an hour because to me, 25 miles an hour is speeding on my 250 Honda Rebel. So I think I'm flying. But, you know, when you get to the end of the bottom of the hill, I have to turn left because I want to go home. So go to turn left. Well, actually, before I get there, squirrel runs in front of me, just like a couple of minutes ago on the video. Squirrel runs in front of me. He goes left, so I go right. So he turns around, he goes right, so I go left. So he turns around and he goes left again. Well, that's the last memory that I had. The next memory that I had was laying on the ground, and I don't even know where the people came from. But there were people standing over me trying to see if I was all right. So the only way to describe this was, I opened my eyes, I'm flat on the ground. I don't even know what happened, but I'm flat on the ground. And you know when you rub your eyes really, really hard, and you see red and blue and green and all this? I'm seeing every color in the rainbow. I'm seeing it so intensely that I can barely make out the people and the sky. I'm just seeing all of these colors. And, you know, the bike is laying on its side, and there I am, and they're like, do you want us to call an ambulance? No, I don't want you to call an ambulance. But what I did want was, I said, could you just help me stand up? Because I could not breathe. I mean, it was like I had the wind knocked out of me. I could not breathe. So they helped me stand up, and they stood up my motorcycle for me, and I got back on my Rebel. And I rode it home. I mean, how else am I going to get it home? So I rode it home. By then, the colors were still there, and I knew you shouldn't ride when you have the color. I didn't know. It was like my third day on the bike. So I rode it home, got it home fine. I got it into the garage, closed the garage, went inside the house, and sat down. I think it was at that point where my entire body said, and we give up. And the reason I say that is suddenly I couldn't get up. I couldn't breathe. I was in intense pain. I have no idea why. Now, from what they tell me, you know, the reason I was able to drive the bike home and put it in the garage was adrenaline. All right. That's what the guy in the hospital says. Okay. So I look at my daughter, and I told my daughter, I think I need to go to the hospital. So she takes me to the hospital. And they say, you know what? It looks like you may have fractured 3 ribs. So, you know, we did some x-rays. We did all these things. It looks like you fractured 3 ribs. So they gave me, you know, like Tylenol and sent me home. I'm like, okay, I fractured 3 ribs. Send me home. Next morning, I get a call. And it's the same hospital. We need you to come back. Why? Why do I need to come back? I didn't like you the first time. We don't think you fractured a couple of ribs. We think you broke your ribs. We want you to come back. I'm like, well, can't you tell the difference? Well, a different doctor looked at it and has a different reading. Can you come back? Sure. So I come back. They look at my ribs, and they they x-rayed my ribs. Like, yep, you broke 3 ribs. Oh, and by the way, the x-ray, it's showing you also partially punctured your left lung. Like, so how do you do that? Well, the rib, when it broke, punctured the lung. Swell. So how do you reinflate the lung? Well, let's give you a day or so and see if it reinflates itself. Okay, let's give me a day or so and see if I can inflate my lung. So I'm there, and other things still hurt. So now they do, you know, we're sending you to a specialist to have you look at it, blah, blah, blah. So I go to my specialist, who tells me that, by the way, you've damaged your kneecap, your elbow. The colors were because you had a concussion. And you, by the way, there's a thing, I forgot what it's called, but it's like your collarbone has a medical term. Whatever that collarbone thing is, I broke that. And the 3 ribs. And the lung. So after a couple of days, I notice I'm out of breath doing the simplest thing, like going to my room. And I'm out of breath. So I go back again to the hospital, who tells me again, oh, your lungs completely deflated. And they show me the x-ray, and one lung is gray and the other one is black. And I'm like, oh, so it's supposed to both be the black one? He goes, no, they're supposed to both be the gray one. The black one means you have no lung there at all. It's an empty chest cavity, and we have to reinflate your lung. You know how they reinflate your lung? They stab you in the chest, and they put in this thing that I like to call a vacuum cleaner, and it sucks blood out of your chest. And then it gives you room to reinflate your lung. So my wife is there in the emergency room next to me, and she's trying to feel better. And she's like, oh, it's nothing like childbirth. And the doctor's like, yeah, this is going to be much worse than childbirth. And he's giving me like morphine. She goes, how would you know it's worse than childbirth? And she goes, and he tells her, I'm a doctor. I've had women patients who've broken their lung. It's worse than childbirth. I'm like, oh, no, it isn't. I'm like, I'm not going to have this argument with her about childbirth and broken lungs. So he proceeds to tell me, and you can't make this up, he proceeds to tell me, this is going to hurt worse than anything you've ever felt in your life. And I'm like, well, before you do that, did anybody tell you I have 3 broken ribs? And he's like, oh, no, I'm glad you mentioned that. We're going to have to puncture you somewhere else. So I'm like, thanks for that. So then they puncture me somewhere else. Through the codeine and everything else, I felt it. I was completely aware. And it bought me an overnight stay in the hospital. Now, again, you can't make this up. They bring me to my hospital bed. They tell me to lay down. She turns on the History Channel for me. And what's on? The history of Evel Knievel. Not joking. And I just look at the nurse, and she just looks at me with a smile and goes, too soon? Perhaps. So I'm stuck with this thing. I'm going for x-rays every week. So I'm telling them one more x-ray, and I'll be able to point my finger and shoot lightning. This is enough with the x-rays. They agree, and they send me for physical therapy. 3 months of physical therapy. Oh. Okay, well, at the end of the 3 months of physical therapy, the only thing I want to do is get back on the bike. Because, ironically, the saying is when you fall off a bike, the best thing to do is get right back on. Well, I fell off a bike, and I got right back on my Rebel. And now I was the worst rider you've ever seen in your life. I could not take that bike more than 5 miles an hour. I was wobbling so heavy, so hard, that it was a miracle I did not go down a second time. So there I am on my bike, wobbling around, and I said, I'm going to need to call for help. This is not going right. So I call my friend, and my friend comes over, and he's like, okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to follow me around. And I said, okay, just a couple of things. I'm really sore. Doctor told me if I fall down again and crack my neck bone and my ribs, I'm going to need surgery. So avoid, and there's a busy street in my town. So I'm like, avoid that street because it has a busy traffic light where they have a lot of accidents. Avoid railroad tracks. I just don't want to get in front of a train. So avoid railroad tracks and let's keep off the highway. He's like, absolutely. So we get going. He takes me around the town, and after about an hour, I'm not wobbling anymore, and I've got the bike up to a whopping 20 miles an hour. So we go through the traffic light on the busiest street in the town, over the railroad tracks, and onto the highway. When we get there, in the nicest, politest way, what the bleep are you doing with me? He said, you have to get over your fears. You have to conquer your fears. Okay, so he was right. I did conquer my fears. But it didn't have to be on the first ride, did it? So anyway, now I'm mobile on the bike again. But I can only get this thing up to 20 miles an hour. I am terrified of it. I think I was more scared of having to go back into the hospital and restart the whole physical therapy crap and all of that again. I just didn't want to have that happen again. So I was scared. And I called up the place where I had my certification test. And I told them the whole story of what happened, and I said I want to resume my private lesson. So they hooked me up with a teacher who is the nicest guy I've ever met in my life. He's their instructor. Wasn't the instructor I had in the first class, but he's their instructor. He's he races motorcycles. He's just fantastic. And he takes me to the course, and he's like, all right, before we do the test or anything, what we're going to do is we're going to try what the items would have been in the course just to get you acclimated so you're not so nervous and you have some practice time. I'm like, okay. So I pick up a V-Star, and he's like, get off the V-Star. And I looked at him like, oh, so you know about the V-Star. And he's like, they have problems with their clutches. I'm like, no shit! Sorry, now I'm going to get bleeped. But anyway, he's like, so he gives me this little Honda. And he's like, just use this one. It's kinder. So I use it, and I'm doing the figure eight, and I'm doing the thing where you drive over a block of wood, and you stop on the line, and you make the U-turns, and I'm doing the whole thing. And it was like 2.5 hours. I'm doing the whole thing with him. Everything's fine. And when it's done, I'm like, so when are we going to take the test? He's like, in a couple of minutes. I'm like, but it's getting dark. He's like, in a few minutes. And we're going through the whole thing. And at the end, he tells me I have been taking the test all of this time. He didn't want to tell me because he didn't want to make me more nervous than I already was. But I was taking the test the whole time. I'm like, bless that man. He was fantastic. So I went to the DMV, got my driver's license stamped, so it's a motorcycle/car license. And now I'm riding my Rebel. And I rode my Rebel for a couple of months. And what I noticed about it was getting beat up by things like the wind. Wind would shove it. If I parked next to other motorcycles, those things look like motorcycles. They look like beefy motorcycles, and mine looked like a scooter. And I'm like, you know what? I want to buy a motorcycle. I want to buy a real one. And I called up my teacher, and he's like, if you like your Rebel, you're gonna love having a Shadow. It's everything that you described. So okay. So I went out searching for a Shadow. I bought it. My teacher went out with me to check it out, which is like, isn't this above and beyond? Like I said to you, the nicest guy on the planet. He went out with me to check it out. He took it for a test ride before me, and then, they let me take it out. And, I didn't know where I was, so I was going around the block, but it wasn't like square blocks like they usually are. It was like one of those blocks that just goes and goes and goes in a country road twisting, and I couldn't figure out how to turn or where to turn, and I'd never ridden a bike as big as the Shadow. So there I am, and they figured I went down, and they couldn't figure out what happened to me. Well, I wasn't down, I was lost. And then I came back, loved the bike, bought the bike. Again, my teacher steps in. He brings it home for me. I mean, oh my God. I mean, we didn't know how to thank him. We took him and his wife out to dinner. We didn't know how to say thank you to this guy. He's like the nicest man on the planet. Anyway, from then on, a couple of months later, I'm riding the Shadow. I got used to the Shadow, and now it is about, I think in a week or two, it's my Shadow's birthday. It'll be 1 year old. So that's my story. And it's more or less my 1 year anniversary with my bike. So guys, share your stories with me in the comments below. Hit like, subscribe. My name is Steve. You're watching Motorcycle Vision. Ride safely, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.